Good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and now powered by our first sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody. You might as well buy them from us and help fund the movement, help support the movement. We at Free People Radio believe in the freedom of movement, and freedom of movement is exactly what the establishment wants to take from you. I am your host, Royce White, and I am here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, for our 30th episode. The day is April 10th, the year of our Lord 2023. And yes, it is my birthday today, 32 years around the sun. No housekeeping today. We're going to do a deep dive. But first, before we do, I want to say I hope everybody had an incredible Holy Week, culminating in Easter Sunday yesterday. And before we start today, I just want to say the Lord's Prayer. So if you know it, you can join along, and if not, respectfully, wait for a moment while we acknowledge our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. What I want to do for Mondays, I don't want to spend a lot of time going over or readdressing or summarizing everything that we talked about the week before, because a lot of these deep dives get deep down into the weeds. However, we are growing at a fairly healthy pace and doing shows like we just did last Friday with Jason Whitlock surely help. And if you didn't get a chance, you should go back and watch the episode, the Family and Friends Friday episode with Jason Whitlock. And if you can, the Fulton Sheen Good Friday address, and as well as his interview with William Buckley from the Hoover Institute and Firing Line. I think a lot of people enjoyed the Jason Whitlock episode, and I surely enjoyed interviewing him. And I enjoyed being on Jason today on Fearless, and the Fearless conversation and dialogue just keeps getting better and better. And Jason Whitlock becomes a more and more important figure in American culture and the dialogue that's happening around politics, sports, culture, faith, so on and so forth. So I'm very appreciative of that. However, we are getting a lot of feedback that people really, really enjoyed Fulton Sheen. Sometimes when you pull that history or you transport that history into the present day, the wisdom just speaks right through to the times, right? And I think Fulton Sheen's Friday address about spectators and his discussion with William Buckley both greatly speak to the times we're in. So I don't want to spend a lot of time going or re-summarizing, but what I would like to do, because we're getting new followers all the time, every day, I would like to, on Mondays, try and synthesize a sort of cliff notes of where we've brought the conversation up to, where we are today, and it'll help me also try to synthesize the ideas, because we have to go out now and pitch these ideas. We have to go out now and minister these ideas. We have to go out now and be warriors and vessels and force multipliers of the truth, the real truth, or even a different perspective. And that's not easy to do, especially because the establishment has spent so much time, energy, and money into creating a narrative. So in order to combat that, we have to be just as sharp in our deliverance of the truth. Now, ultimately, having faith in God and faith in Christ will help us to do that, but we must take that duty and that responsibility seriously. So again, I hope everybody had a happy Holy Week, and Christ is risen, and He is King. And you know, at 32 years old, I feel different. I have to say, I feel a bit different for a number of reasons, but mostly because of what I see out in the world, and the realization that everybody who understands and who has sacred honor and who is willing to live with some sacred honor and fight for the things they believe in, their values, their morals, their ethics, and ultimately be willing to die for those things are now being called into action. Um, we're gonna save this nation, but it's gonna be hard, and people are gonna be lost, like Christ was, and many others along the way and after. You know, life is a beautiful thing. It's an incredible gift. It's a testament of love and grace, the grace of God. But death is also a part of life. And now we are in a position where, as Americans and as free people all around the world, we must confront the reality of death. And we must confront that it may not come in a timely manner, that our death may be untimely. And I wrestled with that this morning. It's been an emotional day. It's been an emotional Easter weekend. Jesus Christ was crucified in his 33rd year on this planet, and I'm now 32 years old, and I see a future where I too, along with many others who tell the truth and speak the truth, could be persecuted, shunned, canceled, censored, and ultimately killed for speaking the truth. Now, some out there would call that a Jesus complex. I find that offensive. Jesus didn't have a complex, and neither do people who strive to be like him. And Jesus really wasn't that complex when you look at it. In his journey and his narrative, he in his divinity is very complex as you could possibly imagine, or even better said, you could not imagine the complexity of Christ or God. We can only hope to get an inkling of understanding of that complexity. But his story and his narrative and his sacrifice isn't complex at all. He came, he was given to us as the only begotten son by the one true living God. And he sacrificed, he died on the cross for our sins. There's nothing really complex about that. And all of us now are forced to confront the possibility of giving up our lives in defense of or in testimony of the things we believe, maybe first and foremost, Jesus Christ himself. So we're going to get to that in a little bit, but I want to circle back and try and summarize and synthesize where we've gotten to thus far. We're in a war. We are now in a war. The war is on. It's not tomorrow. It's not 2 weeks from now. It's not 2 years from now. It's not 20 years from now. It is right now, today. It was yesterday. It was 2 weeks ago. It was 2 years ago. But we're in the throes of it right now. And we're at war on multiple fronts. As I was thinking about this podcast, I thought of all these ways to try and shrink down the amount of wars that we're in, and I had trouble doing it. And all I could think was the only genuine, honest thing I can say is we are in multiple wars. And I'm going to list a few. We are at war with China. We are currently at war with Russia. We are still at war with Great Britain and the Crown, and by way of the entire European Union and the globalists that reside there and that lead an anti-crown movement and have been leading an anti-crown movement since the emergence of Marxism and communism. We are fighting a war internally, a few wars internally. First and foremost, we are fighting a war against globalist elites who hold their allegiance to the European monarchy and the globalist agenda that has been driving America since post-World War II democratic liberal order, and even before that, since the instantiation of the Federal Reserve System and the monetary policy. And on Wednesday, we're going to have a current events episode, but it'll be a little bit different because I'm going to talk about the latest documentary by PBS Frontline in a series called The Power of the Fed, in which this part is the age of easy money. So much in that documentary we need to go over, and I'm going to do that on Wednesday. But we are at war here in this country with the globalist elite. We are at war with ourselves. We are at war with our own desire to have convenience, to have the material high that the Industrial Revolution or industrialization has provided us. We are in a war with the psychological high, the chemical high that technology now provides in drugs and everything else. We are at war on multiple fronts, and most importantly, we are in a spiritual war. We're at war on all fronts. And it's strange for me, as I talked last week about the Mackinder land theory and some of those geopolitical undercurrents that really drive the narrative and the thinking of our elites. And then I talked about Thucydides' trap, another geopolitical analysis or philosophy that leads the West, or at least it leads the prevailing thinking of geopolitically about the tension between us and China. And then I talked about the Uyghur genocide. And it's strange to me, I'll reiterate, to see how many people are willing to shill for China. How many people are willing to shill for the Chinese Communist Party? Got me to thinking all week since the episode was released last Wednesday. And I continue to see video after video of me pop onto the internet of 2.5 years ago, where I called for the freedom of the Uyghurs in a post-game interview on CBS live national television all around the world. Well, the Uyghurs are still in concentration camps. The Uyghurs are still being held against their will. In fact, there are more Uyghurs being held against their will now. And what's most scary is I'm seeing many, many people find the energy to cover for the CCP, to cover for the injustice of putting people in concentration camps against their will, and most importantly, for their faith. And that really is the most important piece of the Uyghur internment or genocide. It's not that they're Muslim, the ethnicity. It's that they're Muslim religiously. And you can tell that that's the Chinese impulse, because it's the same for the Tibetans, who were another religious spiritual faction, and it's the same for the House Christians. Religion there is a hostility, an open animus towards religious faith in China, being executed through their military and police state. And it's starting to spread. It's starting to spread. We are at war with China. I got to take you back a little bit, just for a moment, to help synthesize where we've come to. We know that the post-World War II democratic liberal order was a huge turning point, a huge pivot in American history and in human civilization. We know that the tragedy of the Holocaust was used as a cultural narrative to gain sentiment for the post-World War II democratic liberal order, and then shortly thereafter, segregation, the segregation of blacks here in America, and the Civil Rights Movement, and eventually the Civil Rights Act, was used as a secondary layer and springboard to say genocide, persecution of Jews, slavery, segregation of blacks are now going to be the fundamental pillars of the post-World War II democratic liberal order. And everybody lined up after. It's the women, then it was gays, and then now it's going to be trans, and the list goes on and on and on of grievance politics. Underneath the cultural narrative, there's an entirely different game that has been played. Underneath what they tell you on television, underneath what they want you to vote based on when you go into those polls on election day, there's an entirely different game being played. That game is the game of risk. It's about energy. It's about land. It's about power. It's about bloodlines and lineage. It's about Darwinism. Now it's about Marxism. It's about ideology. All the way down at the bottom, it's about the 7 deadly sins. It's about pride and vanity and ego and wrath and lust and gluttony. This game being played out, this game of risk, came to a head with the war between Great Britain and Russia. If you're looking this way, it'd be Great Britain and Russia. Great Britain and Russia, the great game, a historical term and nomenclature for the conflict that brewed between the Russian Empire and the British Empire for hundreds of years. Settled during the Anglo-Russian, the Anglo-Russo Convention, 1907. By 1908, Halford John Mackinder releases The Geographical Pivot of History. In The Geographical Pivot of History, he says, he who controls Eastern Europe controls the heartland, who controls the heartland controls the Eurasian world island, and whoever controls the Eurasian world island controls the world. Why? Because the Eurasian world island, when you take Africa, it's really the Europe-Asia world island. When you take that landmass and you put it together, you make up over 50% of the world's resources. This was vital for Great Britain, and Mackinder even admitted that his sole purpose was to warn the British Empire that if they did not change from being a supremely naval power with the rise of land transportation and technology, mainly railroads, that in the future they would be at a strategic disadvantage in maintaining control over the Eurasian world island. Explicitly. Now, there were 3 ways that he predicted that the Eurasian world island, or the heartland itself, Eastern Europe, would be a springboard for global domination. 1, a Western European continental power would invade Russia and conquer Russia. Number 2, a Western continental European power would come to an alliance with Russia, most likely Germany. A German-Russo alliance would take over Eastern Europe and ultimately control the world island. And third, last but not least, wasn't prominent at the time, but now we see the significance, that a Sino-Japanese empire or power would conquer Russia and would ultimately control the heartland. Now, that was the theory that, in my opinion, led us into World War I and World War II. And you see that a gunfight, a kinetic fight broke out there in Europe, and there were all these narratives about what the war was about. Was it about communism or capitalism or fascism or Marxism or, whatever the case may be? There were all these ideologies that were tagged or slapped onto that conflict, that great world war. But in reality, we know that multiple things can be true at once. What I'm telling you is that the driving force was Mackinder's land theory, Mackinder's geographical pivot of history. Everybody was jockeying for a position that had now been formally intellectualized and voiced in an academic document that would greatly shape the 20th century. Fast forward, World War II ends. We go to the post-World War II democratic liberal order, in which democracy, as a substitution for colonial power, is going to be taken all around the world. People all around the world are going to go from tyrants and autocrats and fascist dictators to democracy, liberal world order, a rules-based order, the new liberal order, the new liberal world order, also known as the New World Order. And when you hear people say New World Order, they're not pulling it out of thin air. It's been written. It's been written and executed and acted upon since World War II was over. The problem was the technological ideas that surfaced in World War II, when great militaries collided, weren't up and running right after World War II. They weren't even up and running by the 60s. They weren't even up and running by the 80s. It wasn't until the year 2000, Y2K, right? There's all these cultural timelines and markers that you go back and look at retroactively in hindsight and say, there it was. It was Y2K, the internet bubble, the big tech wave, computer technology coming online, it being a consumer technology. This was another pivot in world history. Now, in between, you had what we refer to as the Cold War between us and Russia. This has happened before, where the Russians created an alliance with Castro in Cuba, which was based on communism. But let's be honest, there is no honor amongst thieves. And I don't care if you're a communist, if you're a liberal, if you're a fascist, if you're whatever, atheist, even Christian, there is no honor amongst thieves. So they could say that their alliance was about communism, but really, who knows? Probably getting fat checks. Castro probably getting paid pretty handsomely by the Russians. That's just being honest. And the Russians eventually would push weapons up onto our border and have them there in Cuba. And we, based on the Monroe Doctrine that says no foreign authority can put military weapons close to your border. That is seen as an act of aggression and ultimately the precursor for war or the predicate for war. We came right to the point in the Cuban Missile Crisis of going to war. And Kennedy struck a deal with the Russians eventually, after much controversy, after much military industrial complex misconduct with the Bay of Pigs and the security state, the deep state, doing things that now are declassified as being wrong and being poor judgment on the behalf of our government. They came to a deal. We averted crisis. The United Nations becomes a powerful institution. The United Nations becomes an even more powerful institution, having seemingly now diffused a lot of tension between two world superpowers that were at that time considered to be in Thucydides' trap. In some respects, they were in Thucydides' trap as well. We, the rising power, historically speaking, and the Russians, the declining power. And if you go back throughout history, the Western culture does very well to undermine the legitimacy of Russian power and Russian dominance throughout history. This is not by accident. It's because as real industrialized media and narrative even came onto the scene in the middle 1800s, let's say, 1900s really kicked up, and then now in the late 1900s, you saw media become global media. The West has dominated the narrative. And I'm not being a Russian apologist, but it is a fact that the area now known as the Ukraine was owned by the Russian Empire. And I'm not talking about the USSR. I'm talking about the ancient Russian Empire. Okay? This dispute for this area is not new. So the Cold War is averted, the United Nations proliferates, and all of a sudden you see what is a secondary Cold War or a bunch of proxy wars and global positioning happening based on an agreement, all these different agreements. And then there's China. After the Cold War, all of a sudden, a few people in our political elite create this relationship with China. This relationship. Now, what they won't tell you is that we threw money down for Mao to become the power in China. We made China communist. I mean, we're going to get right down into it today. We made the Chinese communists. We made the Chinese what they are today. We funded the CCP. If you go now and you see the power that the CCP has become, the rise of the CCP, they did it with our technology, with our knowledge, with our ingenuity, and with your money. That's a fact. So you start to ask yourself, why would we do that? This is where the jump ball comes into play. And I've spoken about the 4-player jump ball that we're in since one of the very, very first episodes. And I wanted to give you them. We're about 20 minutes in. I wanted to give you this backstory, this Cliff Notes. One, to work on synthesizing the history myself in a way that you can understand, that's easy and readily explainable for you to reference and go explain to another. Let's force multiply. Let's tell people the truth about what's going on in our politics and our history, because certainly a company like YouTube will do everything they can to make sure that the algorithm doesn't favor content like this. And it's not by accident. If you're fortunate enough for this content to make it through the algorithm for whatever reason, please force multiply. And I wanted to preface this conference, this part of our dialogue today, our deep dive today, for one reason. Because in a conversation last week when I was on Fearless, the question of secession came up between Jason and I. And there are many people who talk about secession, and this secession idea is a dangerous one, and I'm going to get into it today, why it's so dangerous. I propose a different idea, that we annex Canada and Mexico. If by force, if necessary, by force. And I'll talk more about that in a moment as well. So let's stick with this, the CCP and China for a moment. Now, there are many people out there who will say, oh, you're a China hawk. Oh, the Chinese aren't really communists. They're not communists anymore. They're just using communism as a calling card, right? Or, oh, the Uyghurs aren't really in camps. You know, that's just CIA propaganda or whatever. Let's talk about why you hear and why you see such protection for the CCP. Starts right there with Karl Marx, the forefather of communism, the forefather of modern day communism. Marxism. Karl Marx creates the Communist Manifesto, the Communist Manifesto that would later find its way to China in a military coup or overthrow or revolution, the Mao Revolution, that the Americans participated in. We helped Mao take power in China. Now, we don't want to admit to that. We don't want to take the credit for that, but it shows. It shows when you see the amount of shilling and covering for the problem that now is the Chinese Communist Party. And this brings me to a very, very important part that we need to understand about our great nation that we are now faced with the proposition of becoming China, becoming a global corporatocracy, a global totalitarian corporatocracy, a serf society with no freedoms whatsoever, living under a technocracy, living under big tech, global big tech, the eye in the sky. China was all but instituted by Western elites. And you look at Western elites, you look at the West and you think, why would the West do this? If you think about the Mackinder world theory, if you think about the Mackinder world island theory, why would the Europeans try to create an alliance? Why would any European elites try and create an alliance with the Chinese and potentially trigger one of Mackinder's 3 predictions about how the heartland and the Eurasian world island could become the springboard for global domination? Why would we do that? You have to understand the history that Karl Marx and Marxism and communism was an anti-monarchical movement. This was a revolution within Europe from European intellectuals. So when we say the crown, when I say the crown, understand that the crown had to co-opt, they had to ride the wave, they had to adjust their business model. They had to absorb those who would take payoffs, like many on the left have done. Those who would take payoffs, those Marxists and communists that would eventually take payoffs at these world summits with their new aristocratic seats of power, they would take payoffs to allow the crown, the European monarchy, the remnant of colonialism, to absorb the political narrative of Marxism and promote it all across the world to keep you fooled, to keep you distracted. That's what happened there in Europe. But never forget that the Marxist movement was a genuine anti-crown movement. And so they may have taken the payoff, but they never really gave up their animus towards their monarchies and their elites. They never gave that up. And so what you see now on the world stage, as troubling as it is of a proposition for Americans, what you see now is a revenge against the crown. And it's very clear. It's very clear when you look at NATO, when you look at NATO versus the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Many of you need to go and search this today. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the China-led political and economical actualization of Mackinder's Eurasian World Island land theory. They're doing it right now. If you look at the map, there aren't many countries left in Asia, the Middle East, that aren't a part of the Shanghai Cooperation. The only countries that aren't are NATO countries. You're looking at a war between the Chinese and NATO. And wouldn't it be just like the Marxists to go to another country, lead another country, help fund another country from a third party over here across the ocean, the West, Americans, your tax dollars, to build a monster there in Beijing, to build a monster there in China that would eventually swallow up Europe whole. And maybe they don't even have to go to war with Europe. And that's what we're going to talk about right here, right now, today. Because this shit is it. This is the pivotal moment. This is the pivotal moment in American history. We've reached it. Our inception was incredible and brilliant ideological philosophy mixed with faith and divine providence and a new land and all of these things that came together so well for us to pop onto the scene and to grow. And there were pivotal moments along the way. We had the American Revolution. We had the Civil War. We had a lot of things that transpired. Ultimately, we were a country that was still run by the Crown's business model, by the Crown's economic view of the world, by globalism. We were a globalist nation. We were a small nation. We were a new nation, but we were a globalist outpost, America. And the mixture of what would now be considered freedom, the standard bearer for freedom all around the world, and faith in God, which are inextricably linked, they added something to the mix that allowed America to grow into a superpower, afforded strategic military position by two great oceans at a time where it wasn't so easy to cross those oceans. And once we got to become a big enough nation with big enough military and enough weapons, the proposition of invading America became more and more complicated for any would-be invaders, especially the Crown, that probably still held a grudge for the American Revolution. But by the time we got rolling and the Industrial Revolution got rolling, it was better for them to absorb any energy from the American movement and have an American ally rather than try and come and reinvade and conquer America. And really, I mean, you got to think when the American Revolution was, and you got to, it's only a couple hundred years. It's two people. This is my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my dad. Three people, three generations of people during this, 200-year span, more or less. And here we are today, 2023. And right now today, we have to stop being the Crown's water boy. We have to truly separate from the Crown for a number of reasons. One, so we can see who our enemies are. Now we need to know who our enemies are. Now I'm going to forward some positions that are pretty confident that I already know who many of our enemies are, and their actions speak for themselves. But right now, today, we need to dramatically change the way that we view American citizenship and what it means. We cannot continue to carry the water for Great Britain. We cannot continue to be Great Britain. We cannot continue to have the foreign policy of Great Britain. God loved the Queen. I think she's a Satanist. I think all these royal monarchies that were in the European monarchies held some type of weird, sycophantic, power-hungry affection for Christianity. And we have to understand that we cannot allow Christianity to be inextricably linked to colonialism, We cannot allow it. To English Commonwealth, to English-speaking countries, we cannot allow that. If we allow that, we are just as guilty as the Satanists here in America that we say we oppose, and we are actually co-opted in this way. This is what I mean by 501c3 Christianity. This is what I mean by saying our Christians, our 501c3 Christians have become the greatest controlled opposition in the entire game. We cannot continue to let the Crown's ambition to conquer the entire world, whether it be by military force or economic scams. We cannot continue to allow Christianity and American citizenship and the identity of America as a nation to be inextricably linked to their past. And I'll tell you why. It's a fundamental issue. This entire narrative is a revenge against the Crown. When you see Russia, China, Iran, the Saudis come together in a security bloc, what do they all have in common? All of them were beaten by the Crown. All of them were beaten by Europe. They were beaten. They were subjugated. They were made to be serfs. The Chinese don't forget. The Chinese don't forget and they don't forgive. And many other people in that part of the world don't forget and they don't forgive. They were just too weak to build up enough power to actually challenge the status quo, the hegemony around the world. But now that time has changed. The CCP believes that they can challenge America for world domination. And what a proposition that is. Now, I gave you that backstory, that history, that preface, that Cliff Notes in 30 minutes to come to you and forward this question. Secession or annexation? Secession or annexation? Why would we secede? I said this on Whitlock's show last week. I disagree with anybody forwarding the notion that we should secede. It's a ridiculous notion. It's a notion that has no basic understanding of how military works. We cannot secede under any circumstances. We cannot resign from society. We cannot resign from our duty as citizens. From a strategic standpoint, if we split this country up, we will lose the single greatest military advantage that we have enjoyed, that allowed us to be able to sit here and have a dialogue about it before the invaders are at our borders. Now, in many instances, the invaders are already at our borders, but really they're already inside the walls, and there are traitors that we must identify and have the clarity to identify and weed out. And we don't need to kill them. We don't need to hang them. We need to bring them up on Truth Commission so we can understand how deep this scam goes. But there are enemies already within the walls. But what we don't need to do is cook up some shoestring deal, some bogus deal to break away from the Union, to secede. We give up jurisdiction of the American border. It will not be long before our enemies are setting up camp on our shores. If you don't understand this, you don't understand what's happening in the South China Sea right now. In the South China Sea right now, which we'll talk about more on Wednesday, just on 60 Minutes about 3 weeks ago, they interviewed the admiral of the Nimitz, and he said right now today the Chinese can strike the Seventh Fleet, that they can strike the Nimitz right there in the South China Sea, that their Navy is in terms of quantity has surpassed the United States Navy. Now, in terms of capability, in terms of submarines and all these other things, maybe they haven't quite caught us yet, but nobody really knows. Nobody really knows. And even more scary of a proposition is this. How do we know that the military-industrial complex isn't compromised and they're not in on it? We all would like to believe that military versus military is a zero-sum game, and we here in America would like to think that our military could never be compromised, but what evidence is there of that? Maybe this entire military game, maybe this entire military, you show me yours, I'll show you mine, is intended to manufacture the consent of you all at home that the rise of China is inevitable. And to avoid an all-out catastrophic war, we will have to concede that that China is the rising power and we've lost. That America would be doing the rest of the world a favor by conceding to the CCP and allowing them to lead on into the future. That sounds exactly like what the globalists want. And I'm not a neocon. I'm not a war hawk. I'm not a China hawk. I understand what the CCP is. I understand how they came about. I understand what they want to do today. I understand the origins of their communism. I understand the Western elites that played a role in their rise. But I'm not a China hawk. I'm not a neocon. But we are in a place now where we are at war. All the easy decisions are behind us. All the simple answers are behind us. That's done. Now, you can sit in your home and pretend like all of this doesn't affect you, but it's coming down the hatch right now. And while you may not feel, you may not feel the ramifications of the CCP taking over as the world hegemony, it won't be long. It won't be long unless you're willing to give up what America has been up until this point, the things you enjoy, because they're going to change drastically. And that's not to cover for what America has in its history or its past. And that's the number one thing being used to push the CCP forward. And it's not only being used here in America amongst our citizens through our media, it's being used now on the international stage to create a cooperation and collaboration of many nations that were once a victim of colonialism. Are you following me, Tanner? The Chinese can now go to the Russians. The Chinese can now go to Iran and the Saudis or the people in Africa and say, remember what those Europeans did to you? America's no different. English Commonwealth speaking nations, United Nations, Security Council, England, France, America, Russia, China. 3 countries, European. 3 countries, European monarchy. 2 countries on the other side. Double cross and triple cross. It's coming down the hatch right now. We have to be careful. We need leaders. We need leaders that are willing to actually look at these things, wrestle with these things, come up with ask the right questions, and work with the people to synthesize a real answer, an answer that we can an answer that we can create an actionable plan from. Step number 1, Mexico and Canada pose a threat. Canada's allegiance is to who? The crown. European monarchy, Commonwealth, still have the Queen on their money. Justin Trudeau is a puppet. Canada is a threat. Now, Canada is about as American as you can possibly get. I lived there for 2 years. Very American. The people there all speak English, just like Americans. Barely even have a Canadian accent for the most part. Okay? Canada is America. To let them pretend otherwise at a moment where the CCP threatens us, openly threatens us with military action, in the South China Sea and the Pacific Sea is naive. It's naive. It's irresponsible. And in some ways, it may be traitorous. That's where we are now. That is where we are now. Mexico poses a threat. The Chinese are already sending us a bioweapon through Mexico. The bioweapon isn't COVID. The bioweapon is fentanyl. Who's the number 1 producer of fentanyl? China. They're sending precursors to Mexico that the cartels had partnered with them in and sending it right here to America, poisoning us. Now, many of you won't realize this, but the opium war that the Chinese fought with Great Britain, we are still in. This is payback. We are to the CCP. We are the son of Great Britain. We are Great Britain's child. We are the child of the crown and the European monarchies that subjugated them. That's how they look at it. They have that cultural memory. Why? Because they are a very, very ethno-national culture. Yes, there are many individuals with many different ambitions, but they have had a 5,000-year civil war in China to weed out many of their much of the dissent in China. There are pockets of people, but for the most part, the Chinese people are okay with what the CCP is doing. They don't know any different. They've gone from radical poverty to getting the first taste of modernity, something we gave to them. Something that didn't come with the guardrails of a cultural narrative or an ideological undergird like freedom and democracy and having a republic and having the separation of powers or so on and so forth. The people that live in rural China don't adhere to ideas like this. They lived in the natural way. They didn't come from an intellectualized European tradition. They weren't colonial settlers that had these ideas about God and faith and freedom and being a master of your own destiny through freedom and free will and all the inalienable right. They didn't have that there in China. All they know is the Darwinist way, the natural way at the highest level. And so they march in lockstep. If the Chinese people there if the people there in China didn't like the way Xi Jinping was operating things, they would have overthrown him a long time ago, because there's no government in existence that could subjugate the amount of people that live there in China. Am I right or am I wrong? It'd be hard to subdue an American revolution. It'd be impossible to subdue American revolution with 400 million people. They got 1.8 billion people that live there in China. Conservatively, the Chinese government could not stop an uprising there, which is part of the justification they gave for throwing the Uyghurs in the concentration camps. And I want to stop you right there, because here is where we as Americans must take responsibility for what we've done in the past in order to prepare for the future, not to virtue signal and concede and whip ourselves in front of liberals for some type of posturing, some type of cultural and societal narrative posturing. Not for that reason. To understand where the attack is coming from, how it's coming, which is why I feel comfortable speaking on these issues that are greatly geopolitical and military, because the undergird is culture and narrative. And it's my skin that's being used to wage the narrative, and I understand it. It's easy to paint the white European monarchy as the bad guy. It's easy to paint white people as the bad guys. And guess what? You all made it really fucking easy. You made it easy. That's the truth. Now, maybe it was made easy by a group of elites that represented your interest, that you bared the reward from and never really got the reward. And that's true, because there's just as many, if not more, poor white people in this nation than there are minorities or colored people. That's a fact. It's not about the truth anymore. It's about the truth for those with sacred honor. For our enemies, it's about what they can sell. What narrative they can sell, who they can get to come into an alliance to undermine this nation. It's not about the Europeans. They know the Europeans will fold. They know the Europeans will concede eventually. They know how the European mindset works. They've watched it. They got Europe pegged. NATO hangs by a thread. And that thread is the might of the American military. Anybody who tells you anything different is lying to you. They're giving you a false sense of security about the post-World War II democratic liberal order. And the scary thing is they're lying to you about it to hang you over a cliff, while on the back end, they prepare the power that's going to dominate you next. Do you understand? that the post-World War II democratic liberal order was a stopgap, that the prosperity and so-called peace that everybody enjoyed since World War II was just a reprieve, was just a bridge to be able to get the technology online, to bring globalism and totalitarianism and dictatorship to a whole nother level. And we're here now. And the CCP is the shining bright star of their future. Not only in their hive mind-like political hegemony there in China, but also their anti-God spirit, their anti-faith spirit. We are looking at the product of the European dream, the metropolitan, omnisexual, atheist mindset. We are witnessing their creation. This is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is what we're looking at. Nobody with any good sense of history can say that the CCP would have become what it is today as fast as they did if Henry Kissinger and Nixon didn't walk over and show them exactly how to do it and lay the battle plan. And this brings up very great questions about our own nation, who we face in our own nation. If American elites, metropolitan, omnisexual, American elites showed the Chinese how to do it, then we have an enemy within. And I don't want to say that enemy are just the communists. Sure, the Communist Manifesto made its way to China, but it's not just the communists. It's the neocon establishment too. It's the military-industrial complex as well. Because all along, they took the coins. Understand this. We've taken the coins. We've taken the wealth. We've printed money from the Federal Reserve to send to China on an IOU so that we could get fat. That's the reality. Every time we took that money somewhere, our military had to go take somebody else's shit. That's the reality. If you can't admit that, if somebody won't admit that to you, they're in on it. Whether directly, indirectly, whether consciously or subconsciously, they're in on the scamming. We better clarify this shit right now. Because what we should have been doing, we should have fortified Africa. Now, everybody's going to say that sounds like some type of, Black Pan-Africanism, reach. Like I'm trying to promote this as some type of, self-aggrandizement, right? Trying to get some praise or some fans. I'm not. Let's talk military strategy. Africa would have been a great outpost for this nation. Why? Because the African people have shown, number one, first and foremost, that they're conservative, that they have a longing for a little bit of autonomy, an autonomy that we have gone out of our way to make sure they never get, no matter how much they show it. And in fact, every African leader that rose up since World War II that wanted African nations to have some autonomy, we smoked them. And I showed you Gaddafi, but I could go down the list. You can go down the list. 3 clicks, you go down the list. I'm not pitching you a race narrative. I'm telling you that the racism that was allowed to be carried out by the Crown's globalist colonial empire is now being used to come get your fucking freedom next. Slavery in America was a pilot for you. You're next. And if you're sitting at home right now, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, and you think that the color of your skin is going to save you from the next iteration of slavery, you're in on it. You are sadly mistaken. They are coming to lock you up, because I'll tell you one thing. The Chinese, they believe in the Chinese people. And they believe in the Chinese people so much, they're willing to enslave their own people. They're willing to lock up people who have the exact same skin, the exact same name as they do. That's how radical materialists they are. If they can subjugate you, then that means that they've won. That's their culture. Let somebody stand up and say that it's not. I'm telling you, they're lying. That's their culture. You can read it right there. They have no problem lying. They have no problem manipulating. They have no problem doing a lot of the things that we show we have no problem doing. The difference is they don't make any qualms about pretending they believe in God while they do it. We do. We feel the need to at least save face for everybody watching because we have this rich Christian history. We're hedging our bets. We want to say that we believe in God, but lie as though we don't. And at 32 years old, I feel a deep, deep emotional impulse to practice, to lead by example, to fortify that faith, because that's the war we're in now. But make no mistake about it, we could have fortified Africa. We could have made Africa an outpost of American freedom. And if you go back and you listen, Muammar Gaddafi even proposed as the head of the African Union that they create a United States of Africa. Now, he was a socialist. He was he was a dictator, let's say, whatever you want to say. We did not want that. We wanted to roll the dice with China. The great pivot to Asia, Barack Obama, 2014. We wanted to roll the dice with China, and now the Chinese are going to call our bluff. They've called our bluff. They are letting they are letting us drain ourselves out while they prepare themselves technologically and militarily to make whatever move needs to be made for them to execute their plan to become the dominant power in the world. And the question we have to ask ourselves going into 2024 is, one, who can stop this? Can it be stopped? Who can stop it? And what can be done to stop it? I'll tell you the first thing. North America belongs to America. And even furthermore, South America belongs to America. That's a reality. And you all better become very comfortable with it. And anybody who tries to play this game like there's some global collaboration that's going to take place, there's some deal that's going to be struck in between Russia and Ukraine, there's some peace that's going to be brokered between us and China, they are preparing you for a military conflict, the proposition of a military conflict, the real Thucydides trap, to lull you in to the next iteration of slavery. That's what you're looking at. That's the Thucydides trap. This go around. The other 13 times, I'm not speaking to that. Don't know. Maybe there were other powers at work there as well. But I can see clearly what this one is. Oh, China and America, they're on a collision course. Well, no, we're not on a collision course. We are at war. And we are at war through collaboration of people within. And ultimately, the proposition of war and this desire for an endless peace is going to be what brings you slavery. Our great American founding fathers who had brilliant insight despite their many flaws said, if you give up your freedom for security, you deserve neither, and you will have neither. I'll say it again. If you are willing to give up your security, your freedom for security, you deserve neither and you will have neither. Those are the type of ideas that founded this nation. Those are the type of ideas that are worth fighting for. Those are the type of ideas that the crown could not uphold if their lives depended on it, which is why you see the European monarchy now hedge their bets for a Chinese anti-God-led regional hegemony. Spoken just this past week by none other than Macron from France. We invite Chinese hegemony here in the region. After they sucked from the teat, after they've been protected by the American citizens and dollars for God knows how long. The French, you can't trust them. I'm just telling you now. All you white folks at home that have all these these pre-held judgments based on skin, based on radical materialism, based on Darwin and race, all of you people that hold these beliefs, you're going to be tested now. Your freedom hedges upon you being able to see past it. Because if you don't, you'll be lulled into a gulag. And you know what? You might like it. You might like how they jerk you in the gulag. Your boy Yuval Noah Harari, he said it best. What are we going to do with these useless people? And we'll play that video for you on Wednesday. All the stuff I'm telling you, we're going to go back and play on Wednesday, including how the Fed and the monetary policy is now pointed toward China hegemony. We're going to go play all the videos for you. I'm going to let the characters, the bad hombres, speak for themselves. Yuval Noah Harari, what are we going to do with all these useless people? There are going to be more useless people than ever. He called them useless people. The only viable economic answer is some combination of video games and drugs. This motherfucker has the audacity to say that in the public while being recorded. That's what he thinks of you. When he says the human is a hackable organism, that's what he thinks of you. You're too fucking stupid to know you're going to be a slave again. All we got to do is work the technology around your stupidity. Because you don't believe in God. You don't believe in anything higher than this world. So it's going to be easy this time to get you to walk right into the shooting gallery, to walk right into the prison cell. Matter of fact, we will manufacture a chaos and crisis so well that you'll beg us for slavery. We will manufacture the chaos so well that by the time the move happens, you will beg us for slavery. You will beg us for tyranny. And many of you sellout black bourgeoisie house Negroes who can't wait for the welfare state to come and give you some freedom, to come and give you some materialism, to come and give you some prosperity. You can't wait for the CCP to take over. No sacred honor. I don't care if your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your great-great-great-grandmother was a slave. That's got nothing to do with your sacred honor today. You trade one slave master for another because of your history. You think that's sacred? You think that's honorable? You can call yourself a Christian. You can call yourself a Hebrew Israelite or whatever the fuck else you want to call yourself. You can call yourself these things because you're willing to let the CCP have their turn at dominating the world because the white man purged the earth for so long. You've tied Christianity to the sins of man. You've tied Christ to the sins of man. You've tied God to the sins of man. The sins of man, the sins of white men, the sins of European settlers or colonialists isn't an indictment of Christ, and it's not an indictment of God. It's an indictment of man, which we already know. That's why Christ came and did what he did. But there's something we have to own. There's something we have to own for those of us that want to have a country, that want to have a nation. We have to own the strategic defeats that we have faced culturally, politically, and spiritually, and we have to confront them all now at one time. Because if we don't, we will lose this nation. You will lose your freedom. Your children will lose their freedom. They will be slaves. Or worse, they will be killed. That is where we are. I'm not an alarmist. This is not doom scrolling or anything of the sort. And I'll tell you why. Because there is an answer. There is an answer. We must clarify our will in this nation. We are at a turning point. We must clarify what it means to be American. We don't have to live in nostalgia. We know our history. We use our history as a source of power and strength and belief and morale. But now we are put in a position that our founding fathers were put in when they defected from the crown. We must decide the future of this nation, and all the easy decisions and all the simple answers are behind us. And the first thing we must do is make sure that our borders are secure. And right now, our borders are not secure. And I'm not talking about some cartel drug trade that the neocon military industrial complex has been controlling the whole fucking time. I'm not talking about that, securing the borders. I'm talking about we must weed out the deep state, the administrative state, the security state, traitors who are calling us, who are shepherding us into the shooting gallery. We must weed these people out, and we do it at the polls. We do it with our money. Starve them out. Starve them out. Make them desperate. Make them show who they really are. When you make it, this is just like in basketball. It's just like any sport. When you pressure a team, you speed a team up, you make them desperate, you make them make mistakes. That's what we must focus on now, because they're entrenched in every nook and cranny of our society. But it's not going to take all of us to flush them out. It's not going to take all of us to get them out in the open. It's going to take a few people with sacred honor who believe in having a nation, who believe in dying for the things they believe in, to flush these people out. That's Donald Trump. He's one of them. They're showing themselves right now. They don't give a shit of hush money. You think the Democrats and the district attorneys, the Soros-funded district attorneys in the United States of America, care about hush money? The entire Democratic apparatus is built on hush money. The entire American political elite is built on hush money. It's built on payoffs. It's built on kickbacks. It's built on greasing people's palms. It's built on knowing the right people. It's built on shaking the right hands, usually the steady hands that preserve the corrupt status quo. This is America. And you're dumb enough to think that they've had some aha revelatory moment where all of a sudden we're going to take all of the hush money out of politics? We're going to take all the corruption out of politics now in America. That's what they're doing to Donald Trump? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? It's not even conceivable when you look at it like that. The hush money is flowing unlimited. Gavin Newsom is probably up to his fucking neck in hush money. And pick somebody else. Pick them. Doesn't matter. Name somebody. Pick somebody. Doesn't matter. This is common practice. You think when you see a TV show like Scandal, what was the other one? Survivor, Lone Survivor. What was it? The Survivor, where the president, he was the 19th person in the cabinet or whatever, and then they all got killed on the one day at the Capitol, and then all of a sudden he becomes a president. Designated Survivor. House of Cards. All these movies that all they're doing is going and looking up real declassified information about our government and using it to write a fucking original script. In fact, the stuff that happens in the shows is probably a lot less bloody and corrupt and deceitful and satanic than the stuff that they went and read. It's the watered down version. It's the version that can make it through the satanic media industrial complex so they can hide in plain sight. We got to make a decision now to stop drinking the Kool-Aid. We have to make a decision now to put our foot down, to plant a new flag in the sand about what it means to be American. We have one shot. We have one shot to fight for this country. Anybody who tells you differently is lying to you. There is only one shot left. We are at war. We are at war within. We are at war here, there, everywhere. We're at war, and the CCP is coming. The Chinese are coming. Now, do they need to invade America? Well, if not necessary, they would gladly just assume the role of global hegemonic power. Why spill any blood? Of course. But that's going to change everything for every other nation. And the real question is, why on earth would our elites, our entire media, why would we now all of a sudden allow the idea to float out there that America's success and economic power isn't hedged on its military? Why do you think they're building that narrative? I'm showing you how dark it gets. Oh, it gets dark. It's darker than what we've been talking about. Because in many ways, the military is probably in on it at the high levels, or for sure, actually, they're in on it. Not your average soldier, just like your average cop. It's the mayors. It's the city council. Kickback city, payoffs, sellouts, bourgeoisie, traitors, aristocrats. This is who it is. Military, no different. Why would all of a sudden a military that has marched around the globe and put its foot on the throat of anybody who got in the way of its status quo, its corrupt status quo, why would we all of a sudden concede that China is going to rise to power without a fight? Is that strange to you, Tanner? Doesn't that seem a little bit out of story? Doesn't that seem a little bit off of the path for us? That this entire time, we have no problem brandishing the military as a stabilizing mechanism of American power. We have no problem. We have no problem flashing our military. We have no problem showing our gun as a stabilizing mechanism of American dominance, as a global hegemony, with the dollar and otherwise. The dollar politically, so on and so forth. We have had no problem doing that. And all of a sudden, we're in this doom corner where there's nothing to do but pray that the economy turns around, or else eventually, and eventually the CCP will take over. There's a CIA psyop for you. They're all in on it. They're all in on it. All of them, from top to bottom. Show me somebody who isn't in on it. That's where I'm at now. Allow this to be the barometer. Allow this to be the standard by which you start to look and question and judge who isn't in on it. Allow this podcast to be that standard. That question. Who isn't on it? Who isn't in on the scam? We've had no problem using our military any time in history. And now we've had some awakening of altruism where we're not ready to fight for our position in the world and the ideas that we said we were fighting for before. Well, it brings up a very important question. Maybe we weren't fighting for those ideas before. Maybe the American military going around the world really was never about liberalism and democracy. Maybe it was never about the United Nations or the security of freedom and people all around the world and them being able to control their own destiny, or Monroe Doctrine or Atlantic Charter or the list goes, the Geneva Convention, or the list goes on and on and on and on. Maybe it was never about that in the first place. It's not a maybe. It was never about that in the first place. The military-industrial complex was the stopgap for New World Order. They held the door. They held the people down. They stopped revolt. That's how the police in America are a representation of the lowest rung of the military-industrial complex. Not every single cop as an institution. They are there to maintain order. You think it's the order from you killing each other? You Negroes in Atlanta or Philadelphia or DC or New York City or Los Angeles or Minneapolis or Chicago, you think the police are there to keep you from killing each other? They're there to maintain order, which is how many of you got your guns in the first place. You got them from them. You think the Russians are such great smugglers that they can get huge shipments of AK-47s in through the docks? You think with as much gunfire as we see in the inner cities, that every time it's a local gang knocking over a local gun store? Do you believe that? Are you dumb enough to believe that? Two sides of the same coin. We'll let you kill each other so that when the time comes, you'll beg us for slavery. You'll beg us for security. You'll beg us for protection. We like that you kill each other. We like that you kill each other. We like that you constantly scare white Republicans into the narrative that black people are on the loose and terrorizing the entire country, which a lot of you are. Not a huge majority of black people, but there are enough black people terrorizing this country, terrorizing their own community. Yeah, we like when you do that. Oh, that's great for us. You're just creating the consent for slavery. We have to secure our border. Why would we allow Mexico or Canada to pretend like there's some neutral third party in the conflict? They're not neutral. There isn't a Canadian military. The Canadian military is backstopped by the American military. The Mexican military is backstopped by the American military. 100%. The Mexican military can't even deal with the cartels. Understand what I'm saying to you. We're fighting two wars at once. And what I'm proposing, what I'm trying to stress to you today is when we get the call, when we take this country back, if we're fortunate enough and favored enough to be able to take this country back, at the same time, we must be prepared to acknowledge what and diagnose what the problem is truly. Not what Fox News is going to tell you the problem is. Not what some alternative conservative outlet is going to tell you the problem. What the problem truly is and has been. We have to be ready to identify and acknowledge that so we can step in and provide answers transparently when we take this country back. Because if we take this country back and we're not prepared and we're not ready to act, we'll waste our time and the inevitable will still come. And you'll see a lot of your leaders, your would-be leaders, fail you, disappoint you, let you down. We have to start to wrestle, to confront what to actually do. How do we break away from the world order? Let's say Donald Trump is elected in 2024. Are all of you ready for him to make those drastic and extreme choices in order for us to break away from the prosperity and the convenience that you've come to love and enjoy? Are you ready for that? Because if you're not, if you haven't confronted that, if you haven't wrestled with that, then you wanting him to be elected is just a jerk off. If you're ready for him to make those hard choices with the understanding that all the easy choices are behind us, all the simple answers are behind us, now we can get to work. What if he rolls right in and says, you know what, Mexican, Canada, until further notice, until we're no longer in a trade, an economic war, a cultural war, and maybe a bio war with the CCP, until we're no longer in a war with them, until they're no longer openly threatening to take Taiwan, until further notice, you're under the domain of the United States of America. Eminent domain. The government has no problem coming and taking eminent domain when some politicians got his palm greased by some crony capitalist to come and squash the middle market, the little man, the small business owner, or the farmer, or the neighborhood of residents. They got no problem taking eminent domain when it comes to perpetuating the status quo of an industrial post-World War II democratic liberal order. They've had no problem with that. Now they have problem taking eminent domain over Mexico and Canada to protect this border. And you buy that shit? They had no problem taking eminent domain in Iraq. They had no problem taking eminent domain in Afghanistan. They have no problem taking eminent domain in the Ukraine. We had no problem taking eminent domain in South Korea or Vietnam or Japan. Now all of a sudden we're gun shy. Ain't that convenient? All of a sudden when American freedom is at the pivotal moment where it matters most, all of a sudden all of your leaders are gun shy? And I'm the crazy one for saying annex? No, I'm telling you, when it comes to a jump ball, people are going to die. They're already dying. You just haven't felt it yet. And it's them relying on the fact that they created a prosperity for you so good that you don't feel the ramification of people dying yet. That's not real to you yet. Because you can still go to the mall and get your daughter's ears pierced or paint your hair purple. Or come online and talk about the sea turtles who are suffocating from the straws, and go to your little yoga seances where you practice transgender Satanism. That's your reality. And you're so invested in that reality that you're not willing to see that Yuval Noah Harari has already predicted that this is the economic model to deal with you useless people. You people are so self-loathing. This is the real scary part to me, because I'm talking to the few out there. I'm talking to the few out there with sacred honor who know what time it is, who know where we're at now, who know that they're going to be called into action, who know they're going to be asked to make a great sacrifice for a great outcome. I'm talking to them. But these other people out there who we know exist, who are so self-loathing and self-doubtful that they would actually let an intellectual leader who is the chief advisor of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, call them useless and lay out a battle plan to create an economic model where they give you video games and drugs in order to buy their time until you die off? You're out there defending that? You Negroes? You black folks whose grandmothers and grandfathers were enslaved, actually in chains, ran away in the nighttime to escape slavery? Fought in the Civil War to abolish slavery, sat in the South to end segregation, dealt with the terror of the Democrat-built KKK and Jim Crow. Your ancestors went through that for you to shill for Yuval Noah Harari to call you useless and say they're going to give you drugs and video games? And really, when they say video games, they mean porn. Let's be even more specific. They mean they're going to give you virtual porn and drugs. They're going to get you high. The government's going to pay. Listen, think about what I'm saying to you. How do you think the fentanyl is getting in the country? It's not by accident. Any of these neocon conservative Republicans who act like the border crisis and drug crisis is some random phenomenon of criminal genius are lying to you. We, Americans, our elites, traders from within this country are okay with what the CCP is sending us. They told them how to do it. We showed them how to do it with the opium. We showed them how to monopolize opium in the drug trade. We showed them the trade routes. This is a 100-year game plan that you are well behind on. The question is, what do we do? First, we win. We have to win. And I know many people will say that the elections aren't secure. Well, let's make it as difficult as possible, and then we'll deal with the outcome from there. How many of you are running to be for city council? How many are running for school board? There should be an overflow of people running for localized government. That's why I ran for Congress. I could have waited. I could have waited to be 40 and done some 10-year tour where I go and kiss the babies and do all kind of philanthropic NGO work. There's no time for that. That's over. That's over. 10 years from today, when I'm 42 years old, if we don't win, if we don't fight back right now, there will never be another genuine politician to sit in an elected office in this country for 100 years. That's the doom. That's the problem we need to confront now. Watch for the Supreme Court justices. If they start assassinating Supreme Court justices, you know it's on. It's on. This is where we're at. I know you don't want to believe it. And I understand. Your life is comfortable. They made it that way intentionally. They're going to inflate the currency. They're going to inflate the American dollar to the point where all of you guys don't understand how currency works. It works on the sentiment, the belief of the people. Currency is a barter system that's opted into by the people. It's an agreement. It's not real. They're telling you that the Chinese are are displacing us, and you all are believing it. And you're believing it through a cultural narrative, a Marxist cultural narrative about racism and colonial history. It's ridiculous. Two things true at once. Yes, we need to divorce ourselves from the crown right now because there isn't a European country there in the NATO alliance that has any balls whatsoever, and they will sell us out when the time comes. They've already sold us out. These globalists came from those countries. Am I saying there's nobody there who's fighting against it? No. But they have to fight for themselves now. We spent enough time subsidizing NATO and the protection of the European and the European monarchy. We spent enough time doing that. That's over. That's over. The Shanghai Cooperation is on Europe's doorstep. If Europe wants to be a free conglomerate of nations, if they want to be a free European Union, then they better get ready to fight for it. Or sell the fuck out like we know you're going to. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of talking about it. Let's get serious. I'm going to tell you the things that many of these leaders won't tell you. I'm getting sick of all of the postulating and circle and woo. Stop the woo-woo. This nation's borders need to be fortified immediately. Immediately. That means Mexico and Canada, and maybe Central America too. And I wouldn't be against putting our Navy, I wouldn't be against ramping up the production of our Navy and putting our Navy all throughout South America as well, through the South Atlantic and South Pacific Oceans as well. Go back to Mackinder. Understand, when Mackinder said the Eurasian world island holds 50% of the world's resources, what was he saying? He was saying right now the crown has the majority stake of those resources, and if we let somebody else dominate the Eurasian landmass, we're going to lose the majority stake. And in fact, we may even be subjugated in a shift of power. That's got nothing to do with the Americas. You know where the other 50% of the resources are? Tanner, where are the other 50% of the resources? In the Americas. That's not our fight. That's their fear. That's their crib terror. That's their nightmare, to lose the Eurasian world island that they subjugated. Our country wasn't built on that. And if you don't go back and understand what our founding fathers were trying to do, and you hold some weird sycophantic alliance to European colonialism and essentially whiteness, then you're destined to be a slave. That's the game we're in now. If you think the European Union is going to uphold Western civilization against the CCP, you're fooling yourself, and you deserve to be a slave because you're letting petty cultural narratives that were put into you distract you from the truth. Same thing with you black folks. You black folks think that the CCP is less racist than some white boogeyman you have on some pedestal? Really? I don't even believe you believe that. I believe you're just looking for the highest bidder for the next slave master, whoever claims to give you more. I actually saw this argument. This argument was laid out. I saw somebody say China's done more for people in Africa than America did in 100 years, 200 years. China's done more for them just recently than the West has done for Africa. This is the narrative they're using. I'm trying to show you. And guess what? It's true. It's true. In a material sense. Yeah, China will come in and build your roads, and they'll build you an airport, and they'll build you a Chinese fiat currency system. They'll give you the technology, the surveillance technology that eventually they'll use to come and snatch your Muslims and your Christians and your Jews and whoever else and throw them in the re-education camps, or better yet, kill them, black bag them, like they do their own people in China. They black bag their own people in China. No democratic process. No habeas corpus in China. There ain't no fucking habeas corpus. They prosecuted the Uyghurs by facial recognition. You don't even get to see a judge. Most of you bourgeoisie Negroes in America get caught up with the law, which is corrupt here in this country. Nobody can deny it. You get caught up with the law, and you know that you got to go before a judge. No matter what, I have to be seen by a judge. Now, is the lawfare system equal? Is it fair? No. Is it based on money? Yes. Are the judges and the DAs based on money and kickbacks and payoffs and politics? Yes, but you still get to see a judge. Now, many would argue at that level, what's the difference between seeing a judge and not seeing a judge? Well, I'll tell you the difference. Many of you get to go home on bail if you have the money. Many people are locked up longer than they need to when they don't have the money, but the potential is there. In China, there ain't no bail. There ain't no being out on bail if you're Muslim. You have been brought to a detention center because Islam is considered a hostile religion, a hostile faith, and we don't allow people to practice religion in public. They put people into concentration camps for praying, for being caught with facial recognition, praying. How long before they come get you for your zodiac astrology that all of y'all want to live by now? Oh, y'all think that's not a religion in their eyes. It's not a religion yet because it ain't out there. It's not a threat. In fact, that religion would opt for the CCP. There would be all one, year of the rat. There'd be a one big year of the rat, kumbaya, until all the Christians and Muslims and Jews are gone and you no longer have to worry about them. Then you astrology rat worshipers, you year of the rat worshipers are going to be next. And so on and so forth down the line until any widely held beliefs that aren't in alignment with the state will be considered religious. And at that point, they'll have carte blanche to come and take and kill whoever they want. This is the prospect of totalitarianism. This is why our founding fathers laid out that you have freedom of speech, you have freedom of demonstration to believe what you want. And here I am, after Holy Week, not telling you have to believe in Jesus Christ, not telling you have to believe in God. You can believe in whatever you want to believe in this country. That's why this country's special. But what we're not going to allow, what we cannot allow, is for an anti-God hegemony to pull us into self-doubt as a nation. There is nothing wrong with it. There is nothing wrong with this nation we can't fix. There is nothing wrong with this nation that can't be mended. There is nothing wrong with this nation that is forever broken. Why? We believe in Christ. We believe in God. We believe in redemption, but we have to clarify our will in order to be given that favor and grace. That's a reality. We have to be able to come out and say, we should have fortified Africa. And maybe we still need to reach a hand to Africa because Africa seems like it's a nation that has some pretty conservative leaders. They have some Christian nations. 50% of Africa is Muslim now, so they say. But there's a good portion of Africans that are Christians. I meet Africans all the time that come here to America, that have immigrated here to America, that are Christian. Don't you? Plenty of African people are Christian. Now, through the culture, they're running the same cultural narrative there that they are here. Right now, the CCP are going to African leaders, some African leaders, and saying, don't forget that those colonialists enslaved you. Don't forget that they stole your resources. We'll help you. We'll help you build. We'll help you build out of the shadow of the West. And how convenient is it that the West is all of a sudden willing to just relinquish their influence in Africa? Oh, we're out. You're right. White people were bad. White people were so bad to the Africans. Oh, they were so terrible to the African people. They came over. They just brought them on ships. They brought them over in the Middle Passages, and all of the history between Europe and America and Africa was one of slavery and death and murder and evil. So now we're going to give it to China. There's the punchline. I mean, this shit is so wild. I honestly, I sit at home at night with anxiety sometimes just at the prospect that so many people would actually believe this shit. Now, everything I said about the history of Africa, Europe, and the United States has truth in it. The question is, does the punchline change any of it? Is the punchline any different? The punchline's not different. We are watching a message, a narrative being driven to secure the transition of power from a freedom-based country, a freedom-based nation with citizenship, to a technocratic global dictatorship. That's what we're faced with now. That's what we have to confront now. That's what we have to fight now. That's what we have to be willing to die for now. And all of us here in this nation that enjoy freedom and citizenship must rally together. I don't care about your skin color. I don't care about what you believe in. I don't care about your faith. I don't care about any of that. Do you believe in freedom or not? Isn't it interesting, Tanner, that the left, that the Democrats, that the liberals couldn't wait to promote the guidance from the World Health Organization, the United Nations, couldn't wait to throw all in on that narrative. But when the United Nations puts out multiple reports that the Uyghurs are actually being put in concentration camps and there's a real genocide happening there in China, you say it's all fake. Same organization that you let tell you to triple mask your 4-year-old. Same organization that you let tell you to take 75 boosters from now until forever. Same organization that told you that Asia man bad, he eat bat, just like Africa man fuck monkey, HIV. The same United Nations that brought you that narrative, you believe. But when they say the Uyghurs are being put in concentration camps, it's a lie. Strange. The one that has the proposition of your demise and your death, you're okay with the narrative to secure you. The one that deals with somebody else's oppression, you want to deny. You see how the tables turn? You see how I can't believe that you actually care about the historical relationship with Africa and melanated people versus non-melanated people? Go look at the Uyghurs. Go look at their faces. You can see the difference between them and the Han Chinese. You can see it. If you look at the Uyghurs, you can literally see the Turkish features in their faces. They are the black people of yesterday. But not just the black people. They are the Irish people of yesterday. They are the Catholics of yesterday at one point they are the Jews of yesterday. Pick a people. Everybody's had their share of being oppressed. Knock it the fuck off. Just knock it the fuck off. When you act like your oppression is unique, you show that you don't know shit about history. And it offends me. Don't say it to me. Get together with your little 8 jerk-off friends and you guys go to the gym and jerk each other off and talk that shit after the in the showers or some shit. I don't know where you hang out, in the steam room. Jerk each other off in the steam room. Don't say it here with no real serious people. We know what time it is. Slavery's knocking. Death is knocking. Tyranny is knocking. Freedom's the only answer. Freedom's the only question. Freedom's the only proposition. Freedom. The freedom in this country was afforded to you by an idea that you have rights granted to you by a creator that are inalienable. That's unique. Your fucking oppression isn't unique. There's always people being oppressed. Somebody's always oppressing somebody else. Hell, you're probably oppressing somebody in your own personal life. There's probably one weak individual in your own personal life that you got it out for. You know you're going to squeeze and milk that motherfucker. Oppression ain't new. Man is evil. Man feared the light because his deeds were evil. So oppression is pretty common. Man having the divine inspiration to say that human beings are granted rights, inalienable rights by one true living God, that, my friends, is unique. Can I get an amen, Tanner? Can I get an amen, everybody out there in the audience? That's unique. Oppressions, they come and go. Now, what I will say is when you use the Lord's name, when you use the Lord's name to carry out oppression, when you use the Lord's name to go and engage in drugs, slavery, and piracy like the European monarchies and America has done in the past, you blaspheme. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. And we must acknowledge that now and repent. And part of that repentance is we're not carrying water for Britain anymore. Great Britain and the rest of the European monarchy can go fuck themselves. Go live under China. You all want to be atheists, affluent, bourgeois, metropolitan omnisexuals. You go right the fuck on ahead and you go live under the CCP's rule and let's see how you like it. Our brothers and sisters there in Israel, our brothers and sisters there in Palestine who believe in God, who want to be able to practice faith, we better create a retreat for them. Now, these are the real things we need to discuss. While the post-World War II democratic liberal order has widely been contingent upon a conflict there in the Middle East that has been contingent upon a conflict between Israel and Palestine or Israel and its neighbors, now we face a tyrannical force that threatens both groups. What a place to unify. Because I guarantee you when the CCP comes door to door, they may give a pass to the Saudis. They may give a pass to the Persians. They're not giving a pass to the Palestinians. If the Uyghur Muslims are getting put in concentration camps, what do you Palestinians think is coming for you? What do you Jews think is coming for you? You think you're going to get a special spot? You think you're going to get a special spot when the police hit your street? Both of you know better. This is what the political pundits and all of the elected officials who have a stake on either side of the Israel-Palestine conflict won't say because they're getting a payoff from either side. Whatever side it may be, I don't know. Maybe it's some white affectatious liberalism that wants to be pro-Palestine and self-loathing and continue the narrative that all brown people are persecuted, enslaved by white people. Maybe it's some the other side, the Jewish people, whoever it is. Maybe they're getting money from the Jewish lobby. Oh, I can't say there's a Jewish lobby. There's not a Jewish lobby? Really? Fuck off. Go fuck yourself. Of course there is. Of course there is. And there's a Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood's taking money from the CCP, and it's all funneling around to the same exact end game. They're playing 12 steps ahead of you, and Satan's playing 24 steps ahead of them. And you're sitting at home right now waiting for the next headline that you could bicker about at your local barbershop or your local coffee shop or your local political gathering or your local chat room or your local comment section. All the while, this nation's freedom hangs by a thread. And at 32 years old today, I find myself deeply, deeply, deeply concerned about the stability of that thread. And I find myself willing to step into a more prominent position of leadership. Now, my age that I can't help, 32 years around the sun, my age has its limitations. Office or not, leaders must emerge. Leaders will emerge. And those leaders need to ask tough questions and they need to propose tough answers because ultimately this is a governance of we the people and there's no answer, there's no idea, there's no proposition that we should come up with that you won't have to sign off on in order to secure this nation's future. It's not about an idea that I come up with. It's not about an idea that Donald Trump comes up with. It's not about an idea that Steve Bannon comes up with or Thomas Sowell or Clarence Thomas or the list goes on and on and on. It's Victor Davis, whoever it is. It's not about an idea that we come up with. It's about an idea that you're willing to live, fight, and die for. That's the question now. What are the American people who want to have a nation, who believe in freedom, willing to sacrifice for that freedom? You. What are you willing to sacrifice to maintain freedom in this nation? Again, if you're willing to sacrifice your freedom for security, you deserve neither, and you will have neither. I say we annex Mexico and Canada, fortify our borders, then we allow our federal government to reimagine itself and maybe balkanize into a more regional-based federal government. I know the grandiosity of the federal government has bastardized the meaning of community. That's how we got here in the first place. I understand. I understand your worries. We've never been afraid to secure freedom at the end of the barrel of the gun before. We should not start now, especially when an anti-God force is on the move. This has been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy. Brought to you by Free People Radio and now powered by our first sponsor, TireGet.com, which is a part of the alternative economy, the parallel economy, the patriot economy. You have two ways to exercise your citizenship in this country, one with your vote and also with your dollar. Don't squander either. You have to buy tires. They want to take your freedom of movement. What do you think? What do you think the 15-minute city is? You're not going to need tires. You're not going to need a car. You're not going to need oil. You're not going to need gasoline. You're not going to need anything. Based on Yuval Noah Harari, you won't even need to leave your house. So the 15-minute city isn't even necessary, really. You're going to be stuck in your house most of the day, jerking off high on drugs. These are your elites. They're telling you it. So at least the next time you go to buy tires, please, just buy from TireGet.com. There are companies out there who believe in having a nation. And right now, our Federal Reserve and the corporatocracy and our globalist elites are trying to smash the middle market. Who do you think funds all the Republican campaigns? Who do you think donates the money to Donald Trump and the rest of the Republican candidates all across the country? George Soros? No, George Soros is putting billions of dollars in to undermine our justice system by electing judges and district attorneys. The small business owners, the middle market, these are the people who are donating money and giving money to the conservative cause. And some of them are even controlled opposition. That's how fucking serious this situation is. Even the people that we need are weasels. Even the people that we need now, we know are with the enemy. The Karl Rove and the Koch brothers and whoever else you want to name. Even the people that we need now, we know are with the enemy. When we get our turn, when we get our chance, we better be prepared to strike. Be prepared to strike and be prepared to reclaim freedom, which they now say is a dog whistle for white supremacy and domestic terrorism. As always, the fight continues. Godspeed.